Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, what will be the fallout from the decision to scrap the Maryland Healthcare Exchange website? New report has local job growth at its weakest since the recession. So why is it time now to increase the minimum wage? The troubling case of Alicia Rudd. Did the system fail or did her family? In a few minutes with Montgomery County Executive candidate Phil Andrews. Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by political consultant Susan Heltemes, former Maryland House of Delegates Majority Leader John Hurson, past chairman of the Montgomery County Republican Central Committee Mark Uncapher, and Republican National Committee woman Nicoiee Ambrose. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. This week in our series of political profiles, we're sitting down with Montgomery County Councilman Phil Andrews, who's running for the Office of County Executive. Welcome, Mr. Andrews. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you've served as a 3rd District Council district since 1998. How has government changed since you were first elected to office?
Well, a lot has changed. Technology, for one thing, has changed a lot. Remember Y2K and the concern about that, and just the amount of information that is coming at us quickly in government is striking. Emails are now universal. We almost never get a letter anymore, a straight, former type of personal letter. So it's faster in that sense, and people expect responses almost immediately after they send you the email because they know you got it, and yet the research takes the same amount of time. So there's more communication in that way. There are tighter budgets. That's another difference, and there is a more diverse and growing population.
So are you is the duties of government, or is it more, have they expanded, and is there increased focus on what government can do for the citizens?
Well, I don't think it's changed fundamentally in that respect, and my view of government has not changed dramatically either, which is you want, and we need progressive government. Government needs to be responsive to people and needs to be changing to meet people's needs, but you also, government has to make sure that it is responsible in how it spends money and how it plans for the future. So you need that combination of long-term thinking and responsiveness to the individuals that are coming before you.
Now, when you were first elected to the council, one of your opponents, Doug Duncan, was the county executive.
Right.
And one of your other opponents, Isaiah Leggett, the current county executive, was the council president.
That's right.
Now, you've talked about change.
Yes.
So what is it that you're trying to change about Montgomery County? Well,
what I want to change is I want to get our economic edge back so that we can continue to be on the cutting edge of progressive policies, but that requires fiscal responsibility. And let me give you some examples about how we got to change if we're going to get our economic edge back. One, and this is good because we control it, we need to be much more responsible in how we approve salary and benefit increases, because that's what drives the budget. 70% of our county operating budget are salaries and benefits. So the county executive is a person that negotiates those. And we need a county executive, unlike my opponents, who's going to look at the long-term sustainability of those contracts, because that's what drives the budget, that's what drives tax rates, and that's what squeezes things out that people want us to do, like library hours, like infrastructure repair, like protecting the land. Those things get squeezed out. And on top of that, the state is piling these huge responsibilities onto the county, like the teacher's pension shift, which is an unfunded mandate. It's a $60 million increase to our budget, which we don't control because we don't actually approve the teacher's salaries in the council. We don't set pension benefits and we don't invest the funds, but now we're being sent a bill for a huge amount. And they've tied our hands on school funding as well with an extreme maintenance of effort law. So we are going to have increased challenges because of what the state has done. So we've got to make sure that we've got our A game in Annapolis if we're going to protect ourselves.
Well, it's not just the state. I mean, we compare ourselves on this show. We do a lot of discussing about, are we competitive with Fairfax County?
Oh, yeah.
Are we competitive with the state of Virginia? Are we competitive with Prince George's County? I mean, we look at our competitive nature, and we sometimes wonder if Montgomery County is doing all that it can to be competitive in that regard.
Oh, and we're not. Take the energy tax, for example. The energy tax of Montgomery County is by far the highest in the region. And you're right, we're competing with Northern Virginia, we're competing with the district, we're competing with other counties in Maryland for jobs, and increasingly so. And the energy tax is probably the single biggest difference between our taxes and those other places. And it's a huge disincentive for companies that are energy intensive to come here.
Well, I'll tell you what, from my own personal experience as a practicing attorney, one of the biggest problems we have is the change in stormwater management and the increased costs that we're seeing. Yes, it's important to save the bay, but those costs have to get borne by somebody. And not only are there increased costs, but they slow down the development process. So we've got to find a way to balance these things between development and growth and all the programs that we want to do.
Well, the things we can control, that stormwater mandate came down from the state, so we're responding to that. But we can control our tax rates and we can control our own spending, and we need to do both.
All right, one of the other issues that you've championed has been public financing of elections. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, I think a lot of people know, but not everybody. I used to be the executive director of Common Cause in Maryland. I led the fight for campaign reform, and I'm committed to making government more accountable to the public as a whole. I don't take any campaign funds from interest groups, and I haven't since I first ran for the county council 20 years ago. And I want to establish a system that will give other candidates the ability to run campaigns without relying on special interest money. So the public financing system would allow that to happen, because if you participate in that system, you couldn't accept contributions from interest groups. You'd be limited to contributions of $150 from individuals, and you get all of those that you want, because that's not a problem. But we need to reduce the influence that interest groups have through campaign funds. Developers, unions, corporations all have a lot of influence through that, and it's turned people off, and we've seen the dysfunction at the federal level, partly because of that and partly because of the extreme gerrymandering that's gone on at the state level.
Well, I love the gerrymandering issue. Is one that we chew up endlessly. Why don't we have 9 separate districts for the county council instead of the 4 at large? I mean, we have no political diversity here in Montgomery County. Would you champion that kind of diversity?
Well, I did, actually. I did support going to 9 districts back in 2004. Great. I was one of the I think I was the only council member at the time that supported that.
Well, I like you even more than I used to, Phil.
And the reason is, it's really, there's not a problem in having at-large districts in a smaller jurisdiction like Rockville, but Montgomery County has 1 million people, and for candidates to be able to sort of break into an at-large district that's bigger than 6 states is not reasonable. So our districts, if we split them up into 9, would actually all be bigger, or at least the same size, roughly, of the state delegate and state senate races.
Now, you touched on the fact that special interests may have too much influence, and one of the issues I think that we hear is that unless you're an insider, unless you're in a union, you really don't have a voice. So are unions got too big a role here?
Well, I don't blame unions for doing whatever they want to do, for asking for what they want. That's their job. I blame elected officials when they don't make good decisions. So the problem is, look, candidates and officials are human. They respond to incentives. And so if the incentive is to go out and raise $6,000 checks from interest groups, and that's the easiest way to raise the money they need, they're going to do that. The public financing system will give them an alternative, because if you raise a certain amount of small individual contributions from registered county voters, you can get a matching public funds that will help you raise what you need.
Mr. Ambrose, I want to thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Good luck in your election.
Thank you for having me.
All right, stay tuned for our panel, where we're going to discuss the fallout of the Maryland Health Connection mess and the Relisha Rudd missing persons case when we come back from this short break. And welcome back. It was announced this past week that Maryland officials will replace the state's online health insurance exchange with one that is based on a Connecticut version of the same thing, thus acknowledging that a $125 million system is broken beyond repair. John Hurson, along with the flushing sound of $125 million going down the drain and maybe the $50 million for the new system, are we also hearing the demise of Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown's quest to be governor?
Well, in fairness, in all full disclosure, I'm a supporter of Anthony Brown and have given him money. But let me try to point out a couple things here. Number one, it was a disaster, and everybody's acknowledged it at the state level. The state officials have done that. And number two, I think it's very important that the media actually analyze this very carefully, because the impression that's being given by the media, and today we're the media, is that, Anthony Brown was in charge of building this in his basement. I mean, that's not the case. There was a Lot of people involved in this. The state health department was involved. There were lots of people involved. And to sort of blame Anthony Brown for the entire demise of this thing isn't fair. I think he is part of it. He deserves some of the blame. But I mean, I think you need to investigate it a little more closely.
We'll get back to this comment. Mark, John's former colleagues in the General Assembly didn't express a lot of outrage over what was being done. They didn't express disgust over the debacle. Now, should they have? And more importantly, will the public express any outrage over this?
Well, I don't think anybody is accusing the Lieutenant Governor of doing bad coding of the software. That's
well,
not
you
the issue.
would think almost, Mark, that
But
they are.
the management,
like he was in charge of the coding. I mean, that's ridiculous.
But there was plenty. If you read the underlying report that the legislature has asked for, the warnings of the problems that were accumulating right up to the very last in October, there was plenty of information. And the concern that people have is that he's not a good manager, that he should have known about what was going on.
I want to interject here. First of all, every state that used IBM software had the same problems. So Maryland is not alone in that. Secondly,
this is not a software issue.
Yes,
Susan.
it is.
This
Secondly,
is a management issue. If you can't run a hot dog stand, why give them a restaurant?
Well, but the other thing is not as much money is wasted as what they've said. And thirdly, Maryland met its quota for people signing up.
This is not a hot dog stand, okay? That's ridiculous.
That's the point.
Okay.
This is complicated,
Hello.
and it's very, Maryland's not the only state that had a problem. It's not excusable. It's not excusable.
A GS-15
it was very
would
bad.
have done a better job.
That's
not true.
That's not true.
A GS-15 project manager could have done a better job.
That's not true.
Thank you.
You're gonna have the last
Agreed.
word.
Exactly. This is a
not
management issue, as Mark said. I'm sorry, but if you cannot manage a basic IT system, and for $125 million,
It didn't
you should
cost
have
that
a
much money.
spaceship or a stealth bomber. You can build
everybody's
a
agreed.
system.
Everybody has agreed this was a disaster. All the way from both United States senators, the governor has said this was a disaster. They've admitted it was
And
wrong
what is
and
speak
bad.
to?
We got to wrap this
Okay?
up. Here's the problem that the lieutenant governor has. This is the one project that he's managed.
That's not true.
That's not true.
That's not
This
true
is the
at all.
most visible
No,
project.
No,
He
it
did
may be the
brag,
most
he
visible
did-
because you're making it visible,
It is-
Casey.
he did
The
brag
media
about
is
it.
making it visible.
He
That's
did
what
What
they're
was it then?
He did
That's
brag
what
in a whole
elections
lot
are
about
about.
No, it's
Making
not
it-
just about that.
it is
It's
what
about
elections are
trying to
about.
evaluate the character of these people, the ability of these people. This was not his only thing,
Well, then
and
it
he wasn't
speaks-
the only one in charge.
Then
Ladies
it
and
speaks to
gentlemen,
cronyism and giving friends
Ladies and
contracts that they're
gentlemen,
that
capable
he
of
didn't
doing.
give
Susan,
contract
to
to a
anybody
friend?
in
Come out.
North
What,
Dakota.
what
Come out.
accusation? You're saying he gave a contract to a friend? Prove it.
It's not true.
Susan, stop. Because we're out of time.
We can't
And we-
continue.
No,
This
you
is
can't.
so much
We
fun.
got another 8 weeks to. We got another 8 weeks to do this. Come back next week. We'll do it all over again.
Liar, liar, pants on fire.
Okay. Those of us that live in the Washington area have long believed that we are insulated from the effects of the national economy. We live in La La Land. We live in Camelot. Nothing ever bothers us here. Well, the new report from George Mason University suggests otherwise. The new report says that the economy has not grown, that the federal job market is shrinking, and that the day of reckoning may be coming. Susan, according to the George Mason report, total federal spending in the area has dropped more than 10% in the past 10 years. Are we in trouble?
Government isn't going to grow at the rate it did in the past, and with the cut in the defense budget, there are going to be less Beltway bandits getting jobs. But there are ways that government can help out. For instance, one of the things that was analyzed in the report was economic development county by county. But every time we talk about the state or the county giving money to encourage new jobs and industries, Republicans yell saying we shouldn't be spending that money. So it's like, where do we go? The government does have a role. We need to bring in new jobs, new industries.
Nicoiee, the GMU report also pointed out that the jobs that are being created are at lower salaries than the jobs that are being lost. How are our political leaders responding?
I actually think there are 3 different issues here to break out. One, the report cited a 5% unemployment rate, which is exceptionally low. close to our average over time and what we aim for. Secondly, most of the attrition is due to people retiring, and some of those positions aren't being filled. The federal jobs that are being filled are then by people entering the workplace and working their way up. But I think that gets to the third problem of what we actually have to handle is building up the private sector in this area. Everyone cannot just be dependent on the federal government, and it's tax dollars that in some cases could be spent a little more efficiently, but we need the private sector to step up, and we need the states, and especially Maryland, to incentivize companies to be based in this great state.
If I could, I'm going to jump on what Susan had to say about the, quote, Beltway bandits. Federal employment has roughly been flat for the last couple of decades. The growth that this area has come from the contractor community. One of the challenges that Maryland faces is that contractors, unlike government jobs, are very sensitive to business climate issues and they can locate in Virginia, they can locate somewhere else, they can locate where the economy is much more attractive. And as government doesn't increase, and that's part of the issue, spending is not increasing, Maryland is particularly vulnerable to contractors saying, if I got to keep this contract, if I'm going to renew it, if I'm going to bid for this job, I need to locate jobs somewhere other than Maryland.
One of the things that Montgomery County is doing is that they have made a deal with NIST and the federal government to be a center for cybersecurity. And one of the things that Mr. Leggett has announced is that there is going to be a cybersecurity holding place for companies that want to get started. And this incubator is down in the Hanna Center. And this is one of the ways that Montgomery County can take the lead because it is on the cutting center of jobs.
This is a real, go ahead.
But the problem, Susan, is that even if the federal government opens an office or rents some space in Maryland, all of the people who work on that contract will live in Virginia.
No, you don't understand.
It's
It's an incubator. It's an incubator. It's where companies who want to work in cybersecurity are going to be
One
located.
political comment to all of this I would add is that, the new Senator Byrd, head of appropriations, is Barbara Mikulski, which I think will make a difference in the amount of contractors who locate in Maryland.
And that's why we got it.
Till November?
Until she becomes the
we'll
ranking
see.
member.
Ranking members still have a lot of influence.
All
They
right.
do.
This is a topic that I found very disturbing, and that's the case of the missing child, Relisha Rudd. And it's disturbing on many, many levels. And for almost a month, this 8-year-old girl has been missing from a Washington, D.C. homeless shelter. And now with the announcement that her alleged abductor was found as a suicide victim, the hopes of finding Relisha alive are very dim. John, who failed to protect this little girl?
Everyone, in my opinion. I mean, when you look at, both her family and how they were interacting with this abductor, and how the D.C. government was, also not active in terms of really helping in this situation. I mean, I think this is a failure of the whole system, and I say system, but I think we're all part of the system. Families are part of that system, and so I think it's everyone.
Well, the Washington Post pointed out that the government system failed her in their editorial, and I found that very troubling because I think, as you're pointing out, the system is more than just the government system. Susan, who failed her? Is John right? Is it every one of us, or should the family, which their behavior was reprehensible?
Well,
did they fail her?
President Carter just wrote a book about sexual slavery among women in a book called A Call to Action that just came out this week. There is now concerned, it was announced today, that the family, the mother of this young Relisha, was seen recently in a homeless shelter with massive quantities of cash. And there is a concern now that she was sold into sexual slavery. Now, that may seem bizarre, but there are police officers saying, don't give up on her. She may very well have been sold, and God knows where we'll find her.
No, it's a logical conclusion when the family doesn't report her missing.
No.
Their behavior was terrible.
Right.
But I think one of the other things we have to talk about is young women who are unmarried, having no family roots, having children and raising them. This is a concern. This is a disgrace across all races, all ethnic boundaries, all income levels.
We don't know that she wasn't married. we don't know that there isn't a dad around.
Is there a dad around?
There's been
Have you heard
rumors.
of? Have you any mention of a dad being around?
Well, there's
No.
a mention of a lot of people in this scenario. And what's interesting, this guy supposedly wrote a doctor's note. The school system came around. She hadn't been showing up.
Casey, there's an extended family, okay?
Yes.
There is, but you're right. I mean, the problem is that, you know, the system, government systems by themselves, and particularly in situations like this, they're not going to be able to protect these kids. It's the families also have to be heavily involved. It's the same as education. I mean, education's not going to work in these difficult places unless the parents get involved.
Right.
We all
see
agree
the
with
limits to how much government can
Right.
replace
If
a broken,
the parents
a broken
don't give
family.
a damn, Mark,
Right.
you know, and it is very questionable whether this mother really cares. And I know that's a terrible thing to say. The grandmother, or I think it's a grandmother, has been on the news, and she seems, you know, just absolutely devastated. The mother says, "Bring my kids back," but today it was reported mom's been seen with a lot of money.
Nicoiee.
Obviously, if the mother was her primary caregiver and the mother has not seen her in a month, the buck stops with the mom first and foremost.
You're right. I mean,
But
I agree with that.
we know she was an at-risk child.
Yeah.
All 4 of those children, plus her 3 brothers, are at-risk children living in a homeless shelter in D.C. And I really think the state, not Maryland and D.C., I would rank them in the bottom 10 of our union in terms of family law and child services. And I think it's our system. We don't have enough people to protect and look out for people who are at risk. We have to realize the government certainly has its limits, but you have to be there to look over it. If there is anything a safety net is for, it is to protect innocent children.
I know,
and
you
we
can't be-
must improve this.
Nicoiee, you can't be everywhere. The government.
I agree.
The government can't. You
I
can't
agree with
throw.
that.
You can't have enough resources to be a foster parent to every child. I mean,
I
the government.
agree.
That's not government's role.
My point, though,
It's
is
got to
that
start with the family.
I totally agree. But in the cases where the family has abdicated their role, it would be useful. If you're going to spend taxpayer dollars on any sort of safety net, in my opinion, you should be protecting innocent children first.
Well, look, before government's role was so expansive, there were others that filled the void. There were churches that filled the void. There were private social services groups that filled the void. It wasn't just government. I think we're looking at government to be the answer.
You have to-
and that isn't
have
the
to
answer.
You have
back,
to
it
listen to
takes
the
a
other
village, Casey.
The other part of my comment was that our government services are totally failing. If you're going to spend money on it, you better have it structured to actually work and protect people who are innocent children.
All right, Nicoiee, you're going to have the last word. Stay tuned for parting shots when we come back from this short break. And welcome back. Now with parting shots, Nicoiee Ambrose.
This past week, our General Assembly voted for what is unaffectionately referred to as the bathroom bill. I would encourage all Marylanders in their right minds to consider taking this to petition and voting against it when it comes on the ballot. Basically, we are looking at predators who will be allowed to go into women's restrooms. And I don't think any mother wants to worry about sending her children into a bathroom and being accosted and only being able to complain about it after the fact. So, folks, let's look on it for the ballot. We have to get signatures to put it on the ballot, and then let's be careful and mindful of how it's worded, because surely, as is past practice, it's not generally worded in support of telling us what it's actually about. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicoiee. Susan Heltemes, your parting shot.
First, congrats to the University of Minnesota Golden Gophers, my alma mater, for winning the NIT men's basketball tournament last night. Secondly, I am very, very sad today because David Letterman is leaving and my nighttime pal is going to be gone. And third, after our conversation about Hobby Lobby last week, it's very interesting. This week it was noted that they have their retirement money in things that pay for drugs, contraceptives, and what a hypocrite.
Thank you, Susan. John and Mark, you're going to have to go fast. John.
I'm tempted to deal with the disinformation on the transgender bill, but I won't do that. Just a quick condemnation of the Supreme Court decision on the campaign finance bill. I mean, you know, all the progress that was made to try to make this a fairer country where, you know, dollars, you know, people can't buy elections is starting to be eroded, and that's bad.
Mark, quickly.
Secretary Sharfstein testified before Congress. He's responsible for the Maryland Health Exchange. You net out the number of people who were added to Medicaid. There were 60,000 people who were added to the private insurance rolls. That's less than the 72,000 who lost their insurance. So net, we lost ground in Maryland.
Okay, thank you guys. Thank you, panel. I want to thank Phil Andrews for stopping by. Good guy, running for county executive. And make sure you tune in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. And you can remember, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and when you can't sleep because David Letterman's no longer around, you can watch us on YouTube. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.
April 22nd, take part in A Day in the Life of Montgomery County. On Earth Day, April 22nd, snap a pic or shoot some video and email it to pics@mymcmedia.org or tweet your pics at mymcmedia #DITL. Your images will appear on our website and TV channels, so spread the word and share the fun. Visit mymcmedia.org for more details on how you can take part in A Day in the Life of Montgomery County.